We are going to get started with our first conversation of the day. The theme or the title of this conversation is Building to Improve the Human Condition, a conversation with Barb Taylor. Barb is an accomplished digital strategist with over 10 years experience leading and collaborating with teams within digital and media companies such as CBC and Chorus Entertainment. She's currently the interim content principal at TELUS Digital, and she will be having a conversation with Marcia Douglas. Marcia is a proud biracial Filipina Canadian. She has more than 20 years of experience in the development and production of Canadian screen-based contents for traditional and digital platforms and audiences. Prior to joining the Canadian Media Fund, she held roles at the Canadian Media Producers Association, the Bell Fund, and Cogeco Fund. And with that, we'll get started with this conversation. Please help me welcome our two protagonists. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for having us, and we're really excited to be here. Um, I think we're starting with me, right, Barb? I'm going to just do a quick introduction to the CMF. Oh my God. But I don't have a deck. I thought we could just talk about it. And then Barb's going to do a quick presentation on a project she's been working on, which is really cool. And then we're going to have a conversation, and we'll leave some room for questions. Um, So, off the top, the Canada Media Fund is not the only, but one of the major funders of audiovisual content in Canada. It's about $360 million. We have two main streams of programming, convergent production, which is primarily linear content. And in our convergent streams, almost all of it requires a Canadian broadcaster to help trigger those projects. But what we're here to talk about today, which is really exciting, is our experimental stream. And the experimental stream exists to help support innovative and commercial uh, content for really all platforms, but especially for digital platforms, games, software, other content that is about creative and cultural spaces or supports the creative and cultural industry. We have four different streams of uh, programs, sorry. The conceptualization, whoa, I don't know how to use a mic, the conceptualization stream, which is about $15,000. And that's really to help with early stage development. And the cool thing is, Barb is going to talk a little bit about her experiences with these programs. So we won't get too far into it. Um, the next stage is, oh, something went wrong. The prototyping stage, which, as you all know, and indicative in that name, is more about prototyping your content. So really getting it ready for those production applications. And in production, we actually split the main source of our funding into two strands. One is commercial, and the other is innovation and experimentation. So the commercial program is really intended for very commercial projects. So the objective is to fund projects that have a really great probability of commercial success. And all of our guidelines are on our website. But if you look at it, for example, in the commercial stream, 45% of the evaluation matrix is on the commercial potential of the project and about 40% on marketing. And the other strand is innovation. So really focused on bleeding edge innovation projects, either the experiences, the technology, the creativity, what your plan is. And when you look at those evaluation grids, about 60% of that is actually focused on innovation. What does that look like? Whereas only 10% is actually around the marketing. So just as an example of comparing between those two programs. We also, after you get past all those stages, if you've been funded by this, we actually have a program called A2P, which is an accelerator partnership. We have a list of about 30 accelerators to really help those projects and companies to grow within the market. So there's sort of a head to toe approach to funding projects. We also have a linear series program, which if you're working on web series content that isn't for a broadcaster, it also fits in our experimental stream. So we really try to look at various types of content. Um, Two other quick things to note. And we can ask questions, and we're going to hear about your experience, and then we can talk more. But is that the experimental stream is generally quite oversubscribed. The applications, I'm sorry, but they're not small. So they kind of require some time and work back from the application dates. We have lots of information on our website, but also we really encourage, if you're going to apply, that you actually have a pre-consultation. You can call our program management teams. You can reach out to any of us. We want great applications to come in. We can talk about other sources of funding, but I will speak for all of the funds out there. We all want great projects and great applications to come in. So um, read the guidelines, but then feel free to call us. And in experimental stream, for once you get into the production, I think we actually require pre-assessment because it will really help you to understand how to put the best application forward. Because I didn't say this part, but in the experimental stream for production, when you're looking at commercial or innovation, we're looking at up to $1 million in funding. So it's really it's a lot to put those applications together, but it's because there's a lot of investment. And in that program, all of the funding at development and prototyping, it's repayable, but in the uh, commercialization and innovation, those are equity investments. So there will be an ongoing recoupment. If you make money, you'll pay us some money. We hope you make lots of money, um, but it's also it's not like a loan that you have to pay back. It's an investment in your project. I will add one more tiny thing, which is just that over the years we've been slowly trying to introduce factors and criteria to create more inclusive spaces in the projects that are funded. And so over the last, especially last year, we've added two things. One is we now have Persona ID, which is a data collection system, so that we are trying to collect more data and a better understanding of who is accessing our funds, not just from the application perspective, but who's actually receiving them. It is voluntary, it is confidential. Um, we can answer questions about that. And the other thing is, as part of our evaluation matrices, we've added two sets of evaluation criteria. So, which looks at your team and the who's involved in the project. So there is a factor for gender diversity, and there's also a factor for what we call diverse communities. So that is Black and racialized peoples, um, 2S LGBTQIA plus, and persons with disabilities. And we are very open to feedback and constantly looking to expand what that looks like, find the right terms, the right ways to build community and cultivate more inclusion. Oh, and one last tiny thing. I'm so sorry, Barb, because I want to hear from you. Um, but they want to hear about
Funding
the
is
money.
important. Funding is super
They
important.
want to hear about the
Yeah.
money. So the one last thing is, we actually also have an accessibility support program. So if you're looking to apply to the CMF and you need help with your applications, we wish we could write the applications for you. We can't do that part, but we do have funding available to help bring someone on to just help you with actually doing the applications and navigating online portals, because I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Barb, who has way more fun things to talk about. I wish I could say we put the fun in funding, but it's only fun when you get the money. So we're going to try and talk. And because Barb has gotten the money, it's awesome. So she tells amazing stories and she's a successful applicant. So, Barb, do you want to do your thing?
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Marcia. I'm actually currently working at TELUS Digital. Shout out to TELUS crew in the room. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But before I worked on a game, which was funded actually by Canadian Media Funds. So I want to talk about that. But really, the sort of theme I want to talk about is being inclusive in your development and your content. So we'll talk about that as we go through. I think that's what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. All right. The game is called Reconceive.app, and it's a simulation narrative game on the topic of infertility. Now, I was working with a small startup. There was like 10 of us, and we had the rights to this book called How to Get a Girl Pregnant, which was actually a story about an LGBTQ Latinx community member and her journey towards having a baby. And she experienced infertility in all kinds of ways over many years. And so this was the core, and Carlene, who wrote the book, was part of our team. So we were like, how are we going to reach this community? What are we going to build or create? And we found out from the World Health Organization, infertility is a global issue. It's a huge issue. And I'll just, content warning, we'll talk about some things like miscarriage in the next couple of minutes, so just letting you know that. And we wanted to reach this audience. And if you think there's millions around the world, LGBTQ plus people are part of those millions. And LGBTQ plus people have particular issues when it comes to trying to get pregnant. Like if you identify as a woman, how are you going to get some sperm? so, um, so the first thing we did is we thought, well, let's play with Google's speech to text capability. And this was, maybe 2-3 years ago, but we found some significant problems with this idea. The first one is when we tested it, it was obvious that speech to text doesn't work well with a variety of accents. In fact, it's terrible. On this basis, we had to go, we're not going to use going speech to text. However, if you go text to speech, you're okay because the technology simply reads the text. Yeah? And so we tested with deaf and blind communities, and we found that having both the audio and the text was really great and addressed accessibility. We also tested for screen readers. And screen readers are used by blind and limited vision communities to hear what is on your website, your app, your whatever. And just at this moment, shout out to Oscar Wesson, who's in the room. He's accessibility lead at TELUS, and one of the most informed and detailed accessibility approaches I've seen in the digital industry, actually. So he's a good guy to talk to. So we ran into all these problems, and we were like, what are we going to do? We also tested with the Latinx community because the story came from Latinx community, and with LGBTQ community to see what do people want to hear? How do they want to be involved with this? So the next thing we tried was we wanted to be more interactive. So we created an augmented reality part of our app. And I'm just going to play a little video, a very short video with an excerpt from that.
Here's an example of our prototype created with Maya and Unity and integrated with a Flutter iOS app.
The baby didn't make it. I'm sorry. This must be really hard for you.
So we did this with a Canadian Media Fund conceptualization program, which is a little bit of funding to sort of work through an idea. Now, then we went out and tested this with our audience. We met with fertility groups, all kinds of things, and we found that AR is actually not that accessible. People saw it as a gimmick. It wasn't that interactive. So we're like, what are we going to do? Then we got CMF prototype funding, and at this stage, we were almost out of funding. we're at the very end. We've built all this stuff. We've created all this stuff in Maya and Unity. What's going to happen? So our solution, make a game. Because the technology that you use for AR, Maya and Unity, works to create a game. It's the same technology. And also our Flutter app, our hybrid app, same thing. We tested it out with Unity, was compatible. And so we were super happy that that really worked well. And yeah, that's where we're at now. We finished the prototype thanks to the funding. And some of our team is, my past team, I guess, is working on production funding now. And so I guess over to you, Marcia. That's sort of a summary of what we did and how we tried to make an inclusive product.
Oh, I'm sorry you ran out of money, Barb. I don't have any here. So, you've had to build and iterate this concept a few times, which is kind of what happens in the space. It was interesting to hear that when you did the AR version that people didn't find it accessible. And but you did test it with, you said, Hispanic audiences. I'm curious, is language versioning one of the accessibility things that you've been thinking about?
Yeah, language is a big thing because Carlene, who wrote the book, is Mexican Canadian. And so, of course, Spanish. And we've actually been working with, or she worked with a script editor out of Mexico. And so that's a definite. And obviously also French, right, would be a big thing as well. We met with a company in Brazil. Brazil is like the 5th largest market in the world, and that would be Portuguese. They were interested in doing a version. and another company in Italy. So because this is such a worldwide issue, yes, language is a big deal.
Actually, this is a different question because I looked up Barb before today. So you started as a sculptor and then you moved more into these narrative spaces in ways to express story and character. But I'm curious because one of the things I saw you say was talk about the idea of the ability for people to sort of consume your art and vision in sculpture was more limited because it's a very physical experience. And then moving into film, and I think you still make narrative film and linear pieces, you know, that offers you opportunity to expand. But the way that you're talking about this game is it's very global. So how, in your experience, are you thinking about or designing experiences to be inclusive, like so it's not just locally limited or that it's looking more global? You've talked a little bit about some of those other countries, but
Yeah, it's actually amazing. With digital, of course, we can reach a huge audience. And that could be film, that could be a game, that could be a website, all kinds of things. And even, I dissed augmented reality. I mean, I dissed AI earlier with the speech to text business, but AI is also going to eventually, I think, give us interpretation, translation, ASL interpretation. People are working on now with using AI. So these new technologies are going to be huge in expanding our audience.
well, and part of that, I think, and you talked about talking to all these communities. Maybe can you talk a little bit about how building community is helping you to build your work? And you talked a little bit about how that testing makes it more accessible, but how are you factoring that in? And then my follow up is going to be, if you don't already cover it, how building community helps you to navigate the sort of business funding side. And, you know, there's a bunch of people in the room here. If you don't know somebody, talk to them because, you know, how can you help build community even in these kinds of spaces? That was too many questions. I'm sorry.
I'll try and keep track of them. Yeah. Okay, building community has been huge for me. Like very early on in my career, um, I met well, I'll talk about more recently. I met groups like Dames Making Games, like Start Out in the US, which is similar to the organization Queer Tech is trying to build. Also Gradient Spaces, Accelerator for LGBTQ in Canada. It's an awesome organization. And there's so many community groups on the film side. There's Women in Film Toronto and groups like that. So community is huge. And even within digital, my digital spaces, like working at TELUS, there's a big queer group and push for diversity in the crews and that kind of thing. So, and at work, we align together. We talk to each other and talk about how do we make our spaces, what we're building, more accessible in terms of deaf, blind, and other communities, as well as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and LGBTQ, all of that. So these communities have been invaluable in me learning about things and also me even advancing my career too.
And how does let's talk a little bit about the funding and building your company a little bit. Did you always set out to sort of build the budding empire that you are building?
We never set out. We were a small group and we set out, Carlene, myself, and a tech lead, Macy, from Meow Meow Games, actually. We set out to make a game. We didn't set out to make a company, but we had to incorporate in order to apply for this funding. And so we did that. And then we learned things we never knew about and never, like say in Gradient Spaces program, we learned a lot about marketing. How do you reach, and they really made me think differently about reaching a game audience, how to do that, right? Which, I thought about, but not in the depth that I really needed to. So these groups will really help you if that's the path you're on, to do those kind of things.
Cool. Can we talk a little bit about representation and representation on screens, and then even when we talk about in the digital space, thinking about things like UX and narrative, and what that means to you, and how you bring that into your process. And then I'm going to ask you about how you bring that into the team behind.
Okay. Yes. Great question. Okay. Like I was thinking about this, like even images on a website, right? Make sure your images are representative of the community that you live in. And companies and individuals making products should think, what's my community? My community here is Toronto. What's Toronto look like? My images should look like my community. Yeah. And so should my team. You want me to jump right into that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I think, startup companies, big companies should think, how do I go about doing that, right? When I hire, how do I make sure that I'm representative? You know, partly is attending events like this and meeting people. But I think there's still a big problem definitely in the game space. I'll say in the digital space, Ontario Creates once did this study where it looked like 25% of people working in digital were women. That's a terrible number, right?
I can, we, we're still mid-year and we're not quite ready to publish, but our numbers are reflecting slightly higher than that, but still less than 50%.
Yeah, yeah. So, and if you dig into things like maybe your directors are 50% women, but then you go and look at the camera operators or people behind the scenes, and the numbers drop, drop, and drop. And also, I've seen some stats like, number of people in school are 60% women, but then when you go to the industry, it's like 20%. And then when you go to senior people in the industry, it's like 10%. So if you think then you apply that to people with a disability or say BIPOC people, then the numbers are going to be even less. So I think it's incumbent upon us, those of us who are involved in hiring, involved in companies, that we advocate to change things. And change is definitely happening. You can see it, right? And things like the CMF putting LGBTQ and BIPOC on their criteria, and women as your teams, really actually makes a difference too, I think.
And also contemplating things like intersectionality.
Yes, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
And you actually already mentioned this, but thinking about that also in terms of your audience, because from a money perspective, you don't want to leave money on the table, right?
Oh, but it goes the other way too, I think. Like if you're hiring talent and digital talent is limited in this world, except for maybe Twitter and Facebook layoffs. But digital talent is generally limited in Canada. And so if you're not hiring from BIPOC and LGBTQ and women, you're limiting your talent pool. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your opportunities and challenges in navigating funding systems? And it can be about CMF or other funding. For those of you based in Ontario, but I think Queer Tech is trying to build a community not just in Ontario, but there are a few different sources of funding. But you've gone through a few rounds, like you talked about sort of running out of money or running out of opportunity,
Yeah.
maybe. But what's that like? What are some of your sort of tips or challenges in trying to navigate that system and continuing to navigate it?
I'm just curious, first of all, is there anybody here like creating a company, wanting to be an entrepreneur, trying to think, a couple people, okay, thinking about how to move ahead on doing these kind of things? Okay, great. So I say that one of the first things to do is attend things like gradient spaces. There's a lot, at the end of the deck, I have some recommendations for places you can look at, like queer funded kind of things. The first thing is to work out your concept, right? And then with a concept, you go after funding, like say CMF's conceptualization program, which is a first in program, which means you're not judged. It's like first person through the gate that's meets the criteria, which is, it's really easy to get in that way.
Top tip. It's still open right now.
Oh, you're kidding. It's
There's
not
still somebody. It's actually very unusual for us. Most of our first come, first serve programs are highly oversubscribed.
On the day they open.
Yes. It's a bit of a race.
That's kind of funny.
Conceptualization, we changed the rules this year. So I think people aren't aware that it's actually even more open than it was before. So it's open till December 6th if you have some ideas.
Wow. So yeah, if you've got an idea and an innovative content kind of idea, culturally innovative or technically innovative, talk to Marcia or even chat with me. I'll give you some tips. It does take a while. That application is not so bad. But then when you get to the prototyping application, it's like you need like a week to write this thing. You have to have your marketing. You have to have your, I don't know, part of your wireframe, some of your visuals. You have to have a team. And I'll make this comment too about building a team. I met Macy, was our tech lead on the project. I just reached out to her on LinkedIn. I researched. I wanted a woman dev, right? And you know how hard it is to find a woman dev? Anyhow, and then I met her through a Google, some kind of Google event, where, yeah. So, and she's great. And also, what I found is people in the industry are very happy to give you advice. So say you want to create some AI robot or something like that, right? reach out to people who have done it. And there's a lot of top people in Canada who have done this kind of stuff, and they are more than willing to help you. You know, reach out on LinkedIn. It's really the best way, I think, unless they give some other idea, like on their website or something, or their social. So that you have to have your crew, right? And then you go in for the higher level of funding. And then you might start looking at accelerators and, investors. And there is a start out, and I think this organization, Queer Tech, is going to head in that way, looking for who are the investors that will invest in LGBTQ plus and more diverse products. And that's really happening now. There's a real movement afoot. Now, like say 9% of women, 9% of investor funding goes to women. Just think about that number, right? And I forget what the number is for LGBTQ, also low. So there's a lot of hurdles that are getting overcome, and there's a lot of people like Queer Tech who are working on those kind of things now.
No, it's great, and this event is great. So take it
Yeah.
all in. I'm just going to add, because maybe you're interested in this funding, and I do not work for Ontario Creates, but they're awesome. So they also have an IDM fund,
Yeah.
and they also have they have it's not conceptual concept definition, because we all have to have different terms, but it's essentially like conceptualization. Because in order to apply for their funds, you have to have your company needs to be in business for 3 years in the business of interactive digital media. If you don't have that, they also have a program called IDM Fund Futures. That's like a little boot camp program. WIFT actually does one of them, Hand Eye Society, Amplifia, and Web Series Canada. And if you do that, it sort of qualifies you then for their funding. And also, I think they have a special grant program through that stream as well, if you're interested in Ontario based, just as more sources for funding. But as things are so oversubscribed, Barb, how have you had to think about pivoting or iterating, or how do you, like, what's your tip for sticking to it when you're sort of facing
Yeah.
challenges?
It was very hard, actually, right? Because there were points where we were working so hard, and you have limited money, and you have to have a really great idea, and don't be worried about actually pivoting and going, okay, fail fast, right? That AR didn't work. Let's find the next idea, figure it out, move quickly, right? And you get attached to what you've built. Whoops, you get attached to what you've built, and you don't want to, send it down. But you have to, I think, right? You have to be willing to understand, and that goes for, when I'm working at TELUS or I was working with the game. That happens always in the digital world, that sometimes you go down a path and it's just not working. Technically, it failed with the audience. Yeah. So it's just part of the game, right?
Yeah. And I think part of the challenge is there, as much as we're talking about all the funding at CMF or Ontario Creates or something, there's only so much funding available for digital products right now. Although I'm pretty sure I saw somebody from ISED earlier, you can look at things like Shred or IRAP potentially too, depending on what you're building, but sometimes they can be a little harder to navigate.
Yeah.
You just need to sort of do the work and back up. One of the things to sort of go back to CMF and our funding, just when you were surprised that conceptualization wasn't closed yet, it's because almost all of our programs are highly oversubscribed. In the experimental stream, generally speaking, they're about 80% oversubscribed, meaning for every dollar we have, there are eight, dollars being requested.
Maybe I could add to that, yeah. Marcia, is if you're working at, many of you are working at large companies doing your digital thing, whatever, you can also have an idea. I want to build something, and you can't build it there. You can apply to build it through these programs, right? Get a great idea, try it out, right? And conceptualization was great because it's for trying out something. You get a little bit of money, even like $20,000, and, you put a little crew together and do something. And it's super exciting to be able to like control your own project, right? And set your own, best practices and that kind of thing.
You mentioned another slide, and I'm wondering if you wanted to show it.
I just wanted to add some resources. Whoops, here we go. So this is some resources for funding, and also some queer groups. Like the Wings Fund is specifically for LGBTQ games, for example, right? And then there's one of those capital organizations is run by a lesbian. And Out in Tech is a group in the States, and Lesbian Who Tech are also out in the States. But Out in Tech, out of the US, there's a lot of US job postings and stuff, but there are some Canadians in there. So it's just good to join these groups, see what's happening there, that kind of thing, and learn that you're not alone, right? Yeah, pretty much is the aim of making community.
And you'd actually mentioned some other orgs too in Canada before too, and they're probably on your list, but like Dames making games, for
Yeah,
example.
and Queer Tea Gamers. And there's this thing called LGBTQ Game Archive, which lists all the queer games ever made, which is like amazing. Yeah, and their ERA Fund New York, which is like a super big fund to invest in things, really pitches for LGBTQ applicants and for women. They have special events for those groups. And are we almost done? Should I go to the last slide?
I think we actually have more time, right? Yeah, we have 15 minutes. So
Okay.
I was going to turn to questions in a second. One other thing we didn't actually talk about, sorry, because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, and it can be more of a talk about question. So there's events like this. Just talking about, are there other events that you think can be key spaces or markets to try to build community or build that product? And the reason why I mention it is CMF doesn't have funding for it, but again, Ontario Creates actually has their, they keep changing the global market export fund, or essentially it's funding to go to events, especially international events. So things like GDC or E3 or Gamescom.
There's Export Canada holds events like trade events in. I actually went to Mexico City with Carlene, and that's where we met that script writer that she eventually worked with, the queer script writer actually, which was pretty awesome. And so they organize these events for people creating products to go to other countries, and they partially fund it. And you can go and they set up meetings for you where you can meet with people doing whatever it is you're doing, making a mobile app, creating VR, any of these things, or more technical sort of back end stuff also. So that's really fantastic. And there's funding. Actually, they'll fund 50% of your next year plan to go out to markets and meet with people in other countries. And there's programs to CMF programs.
Hey, I can add. So, in fact, CMF has several co-development programs, some co-production as well. But to actually work with other countries, we partner with some of the funding agencies. For example, I think Luxembourg is open right now, and Denmark is about to open. So, if you're interested in working with a partner, you find a partner in Luxembourg or Denmark, and we can either help point you to a bit of a directory. Telefilm also has some of those things. And the idea is that we can support the co-development of a project. And what that does is helps accelerate, but hopefully, your access into those markets and really help to design the project to work more globally. And so we have several of those on our website actually around international incentives.
I'll also mention Interactive Ontario did last year, I think, an event with CMF that they invited people or companies from Ireland. And so it's a virtual event. That's virtual, or the last couple of years have been virtual. And you can sign up and meet these companies, meet similar creators in other countries, and then, make some dealio with them and get some money to make something. So encourage you all to take your brilliant ideas and do something with them.
And Interactive Ontario is another great place to check out in terms of supporting interactive companies in Ontario. And most of the other, if there are people here or people online from other provinces, a lot of the other provinces have similar industry associations and groups to help advance the interactive sector across Canada. Why don't we pause for a second and see if we have any questions from anyone here or online? Would you tell us a bit? There's no one online. Wait, nobody's online? Oh. I was like, what? Hello, online people. Feel free to ask a question. Sorry, you have a question at the back? For those online, sorry, do you want to just repeat the question? Oh, a mic.
Oh, yeah, there we go. So I was just curious, Barb, if there's any elements from the book that you wish you could have put into the game, or maybe if it was in a different format than a game, it would have been better suited for that other format?
That's a great question. Yeah. So actually in the game, what we developed also was a 2D narrative stream. So people could go the 3D route through the interactive models, or they could go a 2D narrative stream, which was in text and audio format, and sharing a linear journey, which in a game, you don't really want a linear journey. You want players to be, have agency to make choices and that kind of thing. But we added that on as a way to include things that we couldn't do in that other format. Also, creating a game is hugely expensive and time consuming.
Did I see another hand? Oh, there's another hand over here. We're going to wait for the mic to come over so the people online can hear the question.
Good morning, and thank you for the amazing conversation. Previously, you spoke about some of the partnerships that you have with other countries. I was hoping you would just elaborate a little bit more on that, as like which countries does your funding agency actually have relationships with, and are there any examples of any successful partnerships, any that have IPO'd or are now on to Series A, B, or C funding? Thank you.
Oh, what a good question. I can't think of the IPO Series A or Series B. To be honest, most of the partnerships right now are in the co-development space. Canada works with other countries in the audiovisual realm, mostly on the linear side through treaties, but most of the treaties don't necessarily apply to interactive digital media content. So there is this international framework for digital media co-production, which I think is from 2010 or 2012. I was actually at one of the funds when that was established, to sort of create that framework for working together. Um, it's interesting. There's been a lot of actually, I think, successful co-development in terms of the relationships worked very well. And, I think there was a lot learned from both sides. And in a couple of cases, those projects have gone on to produce the game or the content. However, they weren't necessarily co-produced, because one of the other challenges, we're very fortunate in Canada that we have these sources of funding. Not every country actually has sources of funding for any audiovisual content, but especially actually in the interactive space. Um, that or I think, well, you were talking a little bit about this, Barb. I'm not sure what you think, but it can be very challenging to build digital media projects. And then if you were to add time zones, currency exchange, foreign stuff, it just adds complexity. So it's kind of always about the right project for the right time, and what the goals are to advance those companies' content, projects. For CMF right now, most of those partnerships are built with countries where there's a initiative from both sides in terms of advancing the work or advancing whatever that content is. We've also had partnerships that are more on the linear side for like web series, for example, or documentaries, or animated films or series. Like it becomes very targeted. I think we've done a lot actually on the digital side with Latin America and Europe. We are excited to look at what other new territories they could be. We're not limited to the treaties, especially in the interactive space. So it's just about finding the right fit and the right timing. We also actually do some partnerships within Canada as well. So, for example, we have a partnership with Shaw Rocket Fund, which just launched again, I think, for first seasons of innovative digital animated projects. Or we are in conversations, but I can't tell you what it is because we're on the internet right now. But there will be something coming soon that's actually more specific to emerging and equity and sovereignty seeking communities in the digital space in Ontario, for example. So you'll see that shortly. It's trying to also use those partnerships to leverage money, community opportunity from both sides to advance projects and to advance those companies.
I could just add a little bit. Is if you're interested in the co-pros that CMF is funding, what you need to do is have a project that works with one of those countries. So say you're working with Ireland or South Africa, you need some connection to those countries, and the company you're working with, it's got to work for both countries. It can't be a real solid Canadian story and then you want to bring on another country. They're like, yeah, we don't want to do that, right? And generally, like Marcia said, they want to be involved from the ground up. So at the development early stage of conceptualizing. The other thing, you can sign up for the CMF newsletter. And I know that I think a couple newsletters ago, there was a list of innovative games that were funded by the CMF. And there, when you see the list, and it's on the website, the lists are on the website of who gets money, and you can just track it back and go, oh, who do they work with? Where'd they get their funding, right? Was it from like an investor or something like that, or government funding, et cetera? Yeah.
And we also have our trends report, which you can sign up for,
Oh, that's really good, actually. Yeah.
which is trying to track more short-term, mid-term trends in terms of what is coming down. We look at different factors, spaces. But Barb, your tip about looking at who got the funding, that's actually always a good tip. And you talked about reaching out to the experts sometimes.
Mhm.
You can't take hours of their time, but I think a lot of people and companies are open to a conversation, and seeing who managed to successfully navigate the system is a good place to start. But don't everyone call Barb. She's awesome, but just spread it around. But it's about looking for who's made something that looks like what you're doing, or that you really
Yes, that's right,
liked and
Marcia.
admired
Yeah.
what they're doing too, right?
I forgot to mention the Ubisoft program. There's a pitch every year for a new game, and so that's a good place to pitch for something cool. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, one last question for you then, Barb. What is something, if you could do it all again, that you might do differently? And hopefully you're still continuing to make stuff too, so you will
Yeah.
be doing it again. But it's what's something actually you either learned that you will keep doing, or something that you're like, maybe not that next time.
Oh, well, 10 years ago when I was making content, there was not support for LGBTQ and BIPOC stuff. There just was not. Funders did not list us on their sites or say, you get credit for doing this. You were, in fact, even a little afraid to pitch that you were queer and you had a queer story, right? And a queer something you wanted to build. There was that feeling. Can I tell a little story? We have time?
Please, yeah.
Okay. Early in my career, I worked at Nelvana. Nelvana Animation House, and they had some dealio with Teletubbies. I think they were distributing it in Canada or something. Do you remember, anybody remember the story about the gay Teletubby? Yeah. So there was a million moms in the US said, that Teletubby's gay. We don't want to have that screening for our kids. And it was the purple Teletubby, I think, right? In fact, we all kind of thought the Teletubby was gay. But, and at the same time, I was working at Nelvana, and I wanted to get benefits for my same-sex partner, and they didn't have it. So I went to HR, human resources at the time, and said, can I get same-sex partner benefits? And I was a bit nervous, and I went around to all the queer people I knew at Nelvana, in all the different departments, because I pretty much probably knew everybody, right? And I thought maybe it would be a bit of a fight, but in fact it wasn't. Like in a month or two, they gave us the benefits, and I was yay. But at the same time, I think there was like a court fight going on for some gay rights pension, something like that. And so insurance companies knew that they had to extend these rights. But I was just thinking about this yesterday as I was thinking about this talk, those two things happening at once, people opposing the content and not giving us our rights in terms of our families and that kind of thing. So, and I just want to say, when you push for your rights, good stuff can happen. And that's what's happening right now with all creators, people building stuff, thinking about diverse audiences and being inclusive. And that's what's pushing funders to change too, right? And even our companies that we work at, we're making things better for all of us. And yeah.
Oh my God, what an amazing place to maybe say just thank you so much, Barb. And thank you so much, Queer Tech, for holding this space and holding these conversations. I hope that when this event happens again next year, that the conversation is just that much further ahead. Please reach out. I didn't, there's no, I don't think it's up there, but CMF is CMF-FMC because Fond Media, we're bilingual.ca. Ask questions. And I can't wait to see all of your great new content and stories. And thank you.
I have one final thing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to say we're hiring at TELUS people from the building the home solutions products are in the house. Jasmine, Joseph, I think. Yeah, over there waving their hands. You're looking for a gig. And there's also Adam, Oscar, Serena in the house from TELUS. So if you're interested in working in digital, these are great people to talk to, and it's a really fun team. And also reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect, ask questions. You know, I'd love to hear what you're all working on and the amazing future that we're going to bring to the world. Yeah.
Thank you.